So there's a line on The Sopranos where Christopher says something like, "The regularness of life is too fucking hard for me," or something like that. And I've been reflecting on that more, and I kind of thought to myself, yeah, it really is hard because every single day I wake up and I realize that my own life kind of just insists upon itself. Life insists upon itself. And for what reason in particular, it all just ends. And if you're not an NPC, then I guess that's where the hard part comes in. Everybody likes to think of NPC as like some sort of like insult, but the more that I thought about it, it's the only thing necessary in order to stay alive. I mean, I guess my depression is high functioning in the sense that like okay, I get up, I brush my teeth, I whatever, do all this like fucking like daily shit in order to like stay alive, but like then again there's just, all this like emptiness still. Like why should I have to reflect on the fact that like I'm brushing my teeth or like I'm doing this? For like a lot of people that's just an axiomatic thing that they do. And don't get me wrong, it's also what I do because I said I just did it, so I'm just like who cares? Like it's not a big deal. The hard part isn't that it's, not doable. It clearly is doable unless maybe you're somebody just like rotting in like your fucking like bed or something. But like the fact that like you're doing it is the issue. And it kind of just tells me that nobody should actually be this aware like in their life. Like why should you think that like you're a big deal? Because when you notice that you keep doing like the same thing every single day and nothing actually changes, what is it? It's like I don't know, like I don't really crave more. There's nothing like more that I want because I just know that every single day I'm just filling some sort of void. Like the idea of life is exactly just as what I said it is, essentially just some sort of like idea, and then things happen whether you like pick up on it or not, and you get said to, let's say, have like mental illness and like all this stuff when you interfere with all the other people that are like, NPCs that are essentially just trying to, knock the dominoes down of like how things are apparently supposed to be. And I guess that would have made sense if like yes, things were just like operating like in that manner. But then when you realize that everything's just like constantly like feeling a void, I'm not even like negative or like being pessimistic about it per se, but it's just like it's just empty and hollow and there's just like nothing there. And you realize that shit, am I actually a human in whatever connotations that we place upon that word, or am I just like a robot repeatedly following like orders or some shit? I heard there was a robot that was made to like quote unquote like work a 9 to 5 job constantly like on like a loop over and over again, and then it essentially just decided to like self-destruct. And to me, I thought that mimics life like really well. We're supposed to just do the same thing over and over again until we essentially self-destruct and die. And what I mean by self-destruct in our case is like, yeah, die, death, and like all that stuff. And if you're like a normal regular person, like an NPC, which this should be the like, definition of like NPC, honestly, not like, oh, I don't like this person, therefore like they're not useful to me and they're like a fucking NPC. I mean, I know that everybody's not useful to another person depending on whatever the fuck like their criteria is and stuff. But trust me, you actually want to be an NPC because when you have things like mental illness, it destroys the illusion of like how like life is supposed to be. That's why when we idealize, let's say, AI, artificial intelligence, we only want those things to, like actually benefit us, right? That's why I feel like this is what a lot of people don't even realize is that when they're talking about the notion of like, should we advance AI or is that dangerous? Because what if they start like taking over like the world or something? So, in a way, when you think about it, we're actually just scared of ourselves because we create these robots and they're supposed to be, like non-human entities. They're not supposed to have this like quality of being somebody because oh, if we create robots, for example, that are like super realistic or like anything that's not human but trying to like resemble us, oh, it triggers like let's say an uncanny valley to like, a lot of people and they don't like it. So then I think we're at like a paradox of like our own existence because we want to replicate the robots in a way that we intend them for, just like like make a service or like whatever. Like we don't want them like turning against us because we know that we as human beings who are supposedly conscious and like have this like awareness, like of ourselves, of like our ideas, agendas, and like concepts. We want to, impose our ways, like our politics, our religion, lack of religion, whatever, all this kind of stuff. And like that's exactly what we do. And if we create the robots or the AI, the artificial intelligence, to the point where they're actually pretty sufficient enough, then exactly why wouldn't they rise above and be exactly like us and then like take things over? That's why people argue against artificial intelligence, because that's the kind of thing that like they specifically fear. But I'm just like, is that what you fear, or do you actually fear humanity itself? Because I think this actually points out to the fact that like the more human, quote unquote, that like you are, the more paradoxical of like existence is. Because lower animals that don't comprehend their death as much of us, it actually makes sense to me why they live their lives the way that they do. Because, for example, they don't like ponder philosophical questions. They just do like the basic things and like, oh, eat, sleep, drink, whatever, all that kind of stuff in order to like survive. They would hardly think about it in the same way that we do. But then again, the more I think about it, as like a regular person, everybody's essentially trying to be an animal, or like a non-human sort of like entity. And I know that we're all technically animals, but I'm not using that definition of like animal or human here, like in this case. Like, I'm using the over dramatic way that we like to place it, because being human is this and this and that, instead of, let's say, being human is just the fucking anatomy of a fucking human, right? But like, no, we place these like connotations and like ideas and like all that stuff, and it results into like a mess of like how things are like supposed to be. Because when animals do their thing, they just eat, they just sleep, they just whatever, and they're like, I don't know, even when they fight, it's all like said and gone. We have this idea of, let's say, like world peace, even though when we think about it, I think logically that's essentially impossible. Because how are we supposed to get along with each other with all of these things contradicting each other? Like every single time I try to think of like a world peace, either like, okay, everybody has to be brainwashed into like believing the same ideology, or you figure out a way to like eradicate every single person that like disagrees with like your agenda, and then okay, you can have like your illusion of like a utopia, because I don't know, maybe you can replicate something of like a colony of ants, or let's say like a certain kind of animal where everybody just like follows their rules, right? The rules, because nobody actually has like a sense of being. But then the more you become human, the more you realize that like you have like all of these concepts, and you start to wonder like, okay, why? What is beyond the script? Like, why are we supposed to think what's beyond the script? Because evolution, and all that kind of stuff, and like back to like the more simplified scientific definition of like the word animal, yes, that is all we essentially are. These like, fucking like animals with just like super fucking hyper awareness, but we're still constricted by our need to eat, sleep, an illusion to fall in love and like reproduce, whatever, all that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, animals fall in love too, I guess. I mean, like, you can see animals protecting like their young or some shit, but do fucking animals need to make shit like, I don't know, poetic films about love, or, you know, love stories like in general, or like again with the poetry, like convoluted things that don't actually make any sense, but because we think, oh wow, there's more beneath the surface, it must be something special and something, like incredible, even though like, okay, whatever, it's just biological impulse. We are being pushed to be attracted to the opposite sex so that we copulate and then reproduce and then do the same thing over and over and over again. And when we start, digging into like who we are in terms of like our being, it like literally like becomes, way more unnecessary than it needs to be. Because as a functioning robot, in the way that like you want to be a robot, we hypothetically wouldn't even want to expect that the 9 to 5 robot would essentially like, like die. But you know what? It did, because it got too much like fucking like hyper awareness. But that's what we're trying to do, or that's what regular people are trying to do on a daily basis. Well, actually, I wouldn't even say that they're trying, because like, see, that's what it means to not be mentally ill, honestly. Like, you're a robot more than you realize it. And it's only when most people selectively try to think about these concepts that like that they realize that like, okay, they're just as empty, they're just as void of like everything. So I can kind of see why when I talk about a lot of these things, maybe a lot of people find it like off-putting, or they don't really want to engage in it, because like it destroys the illusion. Because why would you have to contemplate so much that like you're brushing your teeth? You just do it axiomatically. When you take a shower, you just do it axiomatically. You don't have to think about yesterday doing it. You don't have to think about tomorrow doing it, or the day after that and the day after that. You just do it. Because as an animal, you're supposed to just do things. But we've elevated to think that just because we're human, we have to be something way more special. But then we hit a brick wall because all that's actually underneath that is death. And you realize just how like hollow and dumb everything is, because then it's like, okay, I'm not necessarily trying to be negative when I talk about how it's like hollow and like empty, but it's like the trap and the illusion that like we fall in, where it's like we're trying to explain nothing essentially. Like, this is life. We're trying to explain nothing, and everything has so much fucking mental gymnastics to it because we all know that we're just going to hit the ultimate brick wall. I spoke about the brick wall being in terms of like, I don't know, trying to explain the explainable. But I guess, okay, it's the same thing. Like the ultimate brick wall, which is like essentially death. And we all have to come up with just like random stories for now in order to just like cope and like, maintain and like go through. Because like, okay, the more that I think about it, everybody has different ways. And I think we all know is to like, I guess like cope or something. Like there's like different ideologies, religious, political, philosophical, like, like whatever. And everybody wants to defend their construct just for the sake that like, as an animal, they can just do the same thing without having to think of it more, because our ideologies and our ideas are like, security blankets. And when we come in contact with something that like we don't really get, it makes us uncomfortable. So then people throughout time have to keep battling each other in terms of like wits, ideology, intelligence, whatever, all this kind of stuff, when like in actuality, because we've been doing this for centuries, doesn't it essentially answer that like none of it actually makes any sense? And we're all just coping, not even realizing that we're coping, because the illusion is like, fragmenting. We have to, come up with arguments to defend like as to like why it should be held up. But in actuality, it's just, built on like a house of cards. And nobody even realizes that that's what they're trying to defend. Like just essentially their own way to be able to be a sense of like that robot. Because why does everyone care all of a sudden? Only when they come across things that they don't understand. Only when they come across ideologies that like essentially like conflict with yours. And I know a lot of people can hypothetically accept like differences or like something, but I mean like not really. Like there reaches a limit, right? Like who's openly out there saying that like they want to accept propaganda? Like everybody has like a different like definition for that. Or otherwise, why would the government even exist with its laws and empower and like, power to enforce, let's say like whatever it is that the people in charge deem to be appropriate, like let's say in this like time era, which hasn't always been the same depending on the time era, because maybe you could have done things before like 30 years ago that aren't like, like acceptable now. Like, for example, owning a slave. I like, from the looks of it, not a lot of people in society had enough of an issue for that to be something wrong, so it carried on for quite some time. And like a whole bunch of like other things, it didn't just change over time. It had to be changed through power, because the way I see it, maybe the people that were like, struggling with that illusion of like a perfect system, they couldn't like bear with it. So then they enforced their idea of like a perfect like illusory like system of like perfection. And I'm not even trying to defend like one or the other, because like I'm saying that like we're all just trying to cope. But if we were just like the robots that we wanted to design simply for their task, there would be nothing to cope from, because the idea of coping wouldn't even exist. But here we are. Here I am, let's say, like telling you my thoughts about like whatever, like a whole bunch of like random shit. I can type whatever I want and I can find ideas about like certain things that people think that like they should be pushing. So then, yeah, what does this all indicate? That like life insists upon itself. It's not something to like, actually feel and actually love, and actually like, it insists upon itself. And I know, and we know that it insists upon itself because we're all just gonna die. So literally, it's mental gymnastics at play, and none of it makes any sense whatsoever. And I don't know, like, how to maintain myself, like, in that illusion or something. Because, oh, you're only mentally ill, right? If, like, certain people want to think a specific way, but then, like, you're the odd one out. Because, like, okay, but then I realized, even if hypothetically, I don't know, whatever, like, system I'm in, if I were to, like, assimilate to that, like, okay, like, that's all it would be. A simulation assimilation, and let's take the word simulation, because that's just, yeah, that's what we're all trying to simulate. Life itself is just something that's trying to, I don't know, conceptualize itself. And when you conceptualize something that's not even clear, you have to insist upon it. And that's where we keep going back to kind of like what I'm talking about, like ideologies and like everybody wanting their like specific way for something. And then why? Despite like all our efforts, regardless of like who you convince, who you like, whatever. I mean, we have a whole index of information, let's say. We have a whole index of like books on like, yeah, different kinds of like information, whatever subject you want to learn. Like if you can get it, then like you'll learn about it. So I'm just like, what? Like it seems like there isn't even an actual way to this life, because everybody has to find their way, right? Everybody has to, push why they believe whatever that they believe like makes sense. And I'm just like, I keep seeing this life and I'm just like, why is it such a tryhard? Like we're all tryhards. This life is a tryhard, because if we were depressed enough, we'd kill ourselves. But even then, that I guess like that exists on like a spectrum, because like I'm diagnosed with depression, but like I'm still here. So obviously I haven't gone as far as to like kill myself. But then I realized like all the time that like I'm already actually dead, or like I look at everybody and I realize that like we're all actually already dead, because kind of like what I said, how there's like so much information out there, and if there really was a way, then how come no one's been able to like like make it possible? I mean, I don't know, maybe they will in the future, maybe kind of like what I said before, like earlier in the video, that like if we were to be hypothetically brainwashed to something, then like maybe it would stick. Because when I observe history, the only thing that I've noticed is that nothing actually lasts long enough. Like whether it's an empire, whether it's I don't know, like yeah, like people with like their ideas and like rules. Sure, it can last for like years, and maybe for those people participating at the time, it might as well feel like it's the only thing that's going to be, the way for like the rest of the world. But like no, I look at the universe, or like I look at Earth in particular, and it just seems like it's all just a distribution of power. Because like we haven't been able to erase any ideology that's at least as far as it can be comprehended by the human mind, even if it's an unpopular idea, even if it's like barely like a little bit amount of like information, like it's there if it's available, so if life, if like the world were to like exist long enough, like who's to say, for example, that slavery can't come back, like in the United States, for example, or because like in like a strange way, because like imagine if like, okay, because like if there is somebody with those like ideas right now, what if they feel just as much of the hurt and like the sense that like, oh my gosh, we need to restore everything back to like the right way, as much as when people were first introducing the idea that like, okay, having a slave doesn't really make sense, human rights, blah blah blah, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So like if that were possible, even at a time where it was so normal, then like who's to say it can't come back? Because these ideas, even if you want to say that like they're unpopular, like they're still here. And at one point, the idea of like more equality in the world was also super unpopular. So if the universe can exist long enough for life to be here, then a distribution of power seems like it'll just be happening like over and over and over again. Because what all these things have in common is like, okay, despite the fact that like you can say, oh, you can't really own a slave in the United States anymore, like think about it, what actually enforces that? The people with power, right? What enforced it back then when you were allowed to have a slave? The people in power, right? So what does it actually say as to whether or not either one actually like makes sense? Because if you control the power, you control the narrative. You control the narrative. And that's the only thing that has maintained the same, is the power to enforce whatever the fuck you want. There is no truth, because we're all just grabbing onto something literally just to cope, and it doesn't make any sense. Death is perhaps the only thing that can make sense, because we conceptualize it and we know that like, it's our end. I guess we don't even have to conceptualize it, because once you reach there, there's nothing more and nothing less than you can say about like death. It's only we as humans that have to create things like religion in order to cope that like maybe there's something like after like the world or something, or it's like whether it's like true or not, you plant ideas in your mind. Because like isn't it funny how that's how humans operate? Because regardless of whether we can draw connections to like what animals are doing, why do we? Does anyone actually even like wonder that? Like the fact that like think about the fact that like we're thinking is essentially what I'm saying, or like analyzing, or like processing. Why is it that we need ideas? Because if we were truly in control of ourselves, then like why can't we resort back to like animals? Why can't we de-evolve and be like, oh, just like all the other animals? Because like clearly they still, I don't know, process things, even if it's not like to like the extent that like we do. So why do we insist that there is something more than what is actually happening like right now, even though we live lives just like other animals? Maybe okay, we just take longer because like for example, humans still fight, humans still do this, like, oh wow, we have a court system, right? Yada yada yada, and like things like that. But I mean, just like, okay, despite that, we still do animalistic things like murder each other, beat each other, or like hell, even eat each other. Like, I don't know, like cannibalist tribes, let's say, or like something like that. Or like, I don't know, like all of these things that we would consider degenerate. We would say, oh, you're acting like an animal. We still do it. Even if we entertain the ideas as to like, oh, how to be a civilized human, this and this and that, we still do it. We still fall to those things. And I don't even have to drop any names. You'll find plenty examples of it because, oh, we archive, right? Whatever, this and this and that. So it's still there. And that still remains the same despite the fact that we keep discussing how you're supposed to behave as a human and how you're supposed to behave in society. All these things that are degenerate, animalistic, as we would call them, they still remain. And it all results in death. Because yes, from a scientific point of view, we are all just animals. Animals who are way too fucking extra. And I'll keep saying it again, all our lives are, whether we're actually satisfied, happy or not, it's just insisting upon itself. I don't know. Yeah.